the scent of garlic, aged Parmesan, and old money hung thick in the air at Il Tesoro, Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant. It was a place where deals were signed over bottles of Barolo that cost more than Maria Jensen's monthly rent, and where the lighting was kept dim enough to flatter the clientele and hide the exhaustion etched onto the faces of the staff. Maria, at 28, felt closer to 48. She moved through the narrow gaps between linen-draped tables with an automatic grace. A heavy silver tray balanced perfectly on one hand. Her feet throbbed in their sensible black shoes, a dull ache that had become her constant companion, second only to the persistent, heavier ache in her chest. She lived in a small, third-floor walk-up apartment in a neighborhood that smelled perpetually of damp pavement and fried onions. It was there that her son, Leo, 4 years old and the singular bright spot in her world, was currently sleeping, watched over by a neighbor who accepted payment in meticulously counted cash. Maria was a widow. Her husband, David, a man who had dreamed of opening his own carpentry shop, had died in a tangle of steel and shattered glass on the Kennedy Expressway 2 years prior. He had left her with a mountain of grief, a beautiful little boy who had his father's eyes, and a crushing pile of medical bills that the meager insurance payout had barely touched. Her own dreams of medical school, of scrubs and a stethoscope, of saving lives had been packed away in a cardboard box in her closet, right next to her old anatomy textbooks. There was no time for dreams when survival demanded every waking hour. Now, her life was a blur of double shifts, calculating tips against the cost of utilities and the suffocating stress of knowing she was always one missed shift, one broken-down car away from disaster. Tonight was busy. A Saturday. The restaurant was full, the low hum of conversation competing with the clatter of silverware on porcelain. Maria was stretched thin, covering 3 extra tables for a coworker who had called in sick. She was running on 5 hours of sleep and the dregs of lukewarm coffee. She was delivering the osso buco to table 7, weaving around a man pulling out his chair without looking. When it happened, her ankle, weak from fatigue, twisted just slightly. It was barely a wobble, but it was enough. The heavy platter tilted. Maria tried to correct, her fingers straining, but gravity was merciless. The osso buco slid, landing on the gleaming marble floor with a wet, obscene slap. The thick bone china plate followed, shattering with a crack that seemed to echo with the finality of a gunshot. The restaurant fell silent. Every conversation stopped, every head turned. Maria froze, the empty tray still in her hand, her face burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the kitchen. She could feel the gaze of the diners, the judgmental pity, the annoyance. She could see her manager, Franco, his face darkening near the hostess stand. She squeezed her eyes shut for a single second, her world narrowing to the mess on the floor and the sharp, sudden sting of tears, all the frustration of the last 2 years, the bills, the loneliness, the dead-end exhaustion welled up inside her. Kneeling to retrieve the largest piece of broken plate, the hot shame thick in her throat, she muttered the words under her breath. It was a curse her Sicilian grandmother used to whisper when she burned the biscotti, a dark, guttural phrase. Porca miseria. It was quiet, meant only for herself, a tiny release of unbearable pressure. She began gathering the smaller shards, her hands trembling, expecting the sharp reprimand of her manager. She did not expect the voice. It was deep, smooth, and laced with an amusement that held no kindness. It came from the alcove table, the one reserved for the most important guests, the one shrouded in shadow. Say that again. Maria's head snapped up. He was sitting alone at a table set for 4, though his companions seemed to have stepped away. She hadn't been serving him. It wasn't her section. She'd only been aware of him as a presence, a stillness in the center of the room's chaos. Now, she saw him, Niccolo Cavallo. Even if you didn't know the name, you knew the power. It rolled off him in palpable waves. He was 35, dressed in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed molded to his broad shoulders and lean frame. His hair was thick and dark, his features sharp. as if carved from unforgiving Italian marble. He was, Maria registered with a distant part of her brain, devastatingly attractive. But it was an attraction steeped in danger, like admiring a panther through the bars of a cage. He was the head of the Cavallo family in Chicago. That name meant he owned parts of the city that didn't appear on any map. He held influence in the glittering high-rises of the Loop and the dark, hidden corners of the underworld. And he was looking directly at her. His eyes, dark and assessing, held no judgment about the spilled food. They held only an intense, unnerving focus. "What did you just say?" Niccolò Cavallo repeated, his voice low. Maria's throat was dry. The broken plate suddenly felt heavy in her hand. She was trapped in the beam of his attention. I apologize. Sir, I was just cleaning this up." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Though it never reached his eyes, he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. The movement was fluid, controlled. "You said, porca miseria." You said it like you meant it, like it tasted familiar. He hadn't just heard her, he had understood the nuance, the raw frustration behind the old words. Maria stared, unable to form a response. The manager was now rushing toward them, his face pale. But Niccolò Cavallo lifted one hand, a short, sharp gesture, and the manager stopped dead in his tracks. The Mafia boss never broke eye contact with Maria. The silence of the restaurant stretched, taut and fragile. He had made her the center of his world, and in doing so, the center of everyone's. "It's an old saying," Maria finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "It is," Niccolò agreed, his gaze analytical. He was watching her, the worn-out shoes, the trembling hand, the defiance that still lingered in her eyes despite the humiliation. He tilted his head. "Porca miseria," he repeated softly, the words rolling off his tongue with authentic, inherited darkness. Bloody misery, indeed. And he smiled. This time, it was a true smile. A flash of white teeth in the dim light. It was terrifying, and it was the most compelling thing Maria had ever seen. The silence that followed his smile was heavier than the silence that had followed the crash. Maria felt pinned by his gaze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Franco, her manager, finally unfroze and scurried over, his face a mask of frantic apology. He began apologizing profusely to Niccolò Cavallo, ignoring Maria completely as if she were a piece of malfunctioning furniture. A busboy rushed in with a dustpan and brush, his movements quick and nervous, sweeping away the evidence of her failure. Niccolò Cavallo never looked at Franco. His eyes remained locked on Maria, with a small, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist. He dismissed the manager. Franco stopped mid-sentence, bowed awkwardly, and retreated, shooting Maria a look that promised consequences. Maria finally found her feet, rising from the floor. She wanted to run, to hide in the kitchen, to clock out and flee into the night, but her section was still her section, and the alcove table was now, impossibly, part of her responsibility. For the next hour, she was intensely, painfully aware of him. It was not a simple feeling of being watched. It was a physical weight, a pressure against her skin. She could feel his gaze follow her as she delivered plates, as she refilled water glasses, as she cleared breadcrumbs. It was not a leering look. It was something far more unnerving. It was analytical. It was patient. It was as if he were disassembling her, piece by piece, trying to understand how she worked. She kept her own eyes down, focusing on her tasks, her movements becoming robotic. She tried to route herself around the room to avoid passing his table, but the geography of the restaurant made it impossible. Every time she passed, the air grew thicker. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade, and all she could hear was the beat of her own heart. His companions returned, 2 men in dark suits, their faces impassive, their presence only amplifying the aura of danger that surrounded Niccolò. They spoke in low tones, but Niccolò himself said little. He merely sat, nursing a glass of dark red wine, and watched her. Finally, The inevitable moment arrived. The diners at the table next to his finished their meal. Maria had to clear it. It placed her directly beside him. She worked quickly, stacking the plates, her hands betraying a slight tremble she could not control. She refused to look at him. "You have composure." His voice, so close, startled her, and she nearly dropped a dessert fork. She turned, her professional smile feeling like a grimace. He was looking up at her, his head tilted. "Sir." "After your frustration," he said, a faint hint of that smile returning. "You did not panic. You did not weep. You simply cursed, and you cleaned." Maria gripped the stack of plates. "I was just doing my job, sir. And again, I apologize for the disturbance." "Do not," he said, his voice soft but carrying an authority that demanded obedience. "It was, as I said, interesting. What is your name?" "Maria, sir, Maria Jensen." He repeated her first name, tasting it. "Maria." He ignored the surname. "You are not just Italian by cursing. Your accent when you spoke to me. Where is your family from?" She felt exposed, as if he were reading a private file. "My grandmother. She was from Palermo." He nodded slowly, a look of understanding passing over his features. "Palermo. That explains it." He held her gaze, and she felt that strange pull again, a connection she could not understand and did not want. One of his companions cleared his throat, a pointed sound meant to recall his boss's attention. Niccolo ignored him completely. Maria, desperate to escape, turned to retrieve the last few empty glasses from the table she had cleared. She was rattled, her movements jerky, her sleeve, damp from where she had wiped her hands on her apron, brushed against the stem of his full wine glass. It tipped. It did not shatter. It simply overturned. A silent, terrible wave of deep crimson flooding across the white linen and splashing directly onto the front of his pristine white shirt. Time stopped. The two men beside him froze, their eyes widening in genuine terror. Franco, across the room, looked as if he might collapse. Maria's blood ran cold. She stared at the dark stain, spreading like a fresh wound against his chest. She had gone from humiliation to mortal error. She looked at his face, bracing for the explosion, the rage, the shout, the cold fury of a man like him. Niccolo Cavallo looked down at the ruin of his shirt. He looked at the spilled wine on the table. And then he looked back at Maria. He began to smile. It was not a small quirk this time, but a slow, widening smile that showed his teeth. It was bright, shocking, and utterly terrifying in its calm. "It seems," he said, his voice laced with a deep, velvety amusement, "that you are determined to leave an impression tonight. Maria from Palermo." He picked up his napkin and idly touched it to the stain, making it worse. "I believe this is a $5,000 shirt." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. I am so sorry. I do not know what to say. I will get a cloth." She fumbled, reaching for a seltzer bottle on her tray, her hands shaking so violently she could barely function. "No," he said, and his hand shot out, not to strike her, but to gently, firmly, capture her wrist. His grip was light, but the strength behind it was absolute. She froze, her skin tingling where his fingers rested. His thumb brushed over her pulse point, feeling the frantic rabbit beat of her heart. "Stop shaking," he commanded softly. He brought her hand, the one still holding a napkin, toward his chest. "Now, clean it." It was an impossible request. She was trembling, and dabbing at the stain would do nothing. But it was an order. She was forced to touch him, her knuckles brushing the hard plane of his chest through the damp fabric. She could feel the warmth of his skin beneath. She looked up, her face only inches from his. She saw his eyes. They were the color of the darkest espresso, almost black, and in them, she saw the strangest contradiction. There was a coldness. Yes, the absolute, assessing chill of a predator. But beneath it, there was a spark of something else. A flicker of genuine, focused warmth. It was not kindness. It was interest. A deep, burning, and possessive interest. He was looking at her as if she were a puzzle he had just discovered, and he was suddenly, desperately, eager to solve it. This close, she could smell his cologne, a rich scent of sandalwood and something faintly metallic, like ozone before a storm. She pulled her hand back as if burned, the napkin falling to the floor. He let her go. The moment shattered. Niccolo stood abruptly. His men rose with him, their chairs scraping quietly. He looked down at his ruined shirt, then back at her, the smile fading into a look of quiet consideration. "I will see you again, Maria," he said. It was not a hope or a question. It was a statement of fact. He turned and walked out of the restaurant, his men falling into step behind him, leaving a stunned silence and the faint smell of spilled wine in his wake. Maria stood rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should have felt relief. She should have felt pure, unadulterated fear. She had just assaulted twice the most powerful and dangerous man in Chicago. But as she watched him go, the only thing she could feel was a dizzying, terrifying, and completely inexplicable pull, a strange magnetism drawing her toward the very danger she should have been running from. The shift at Il Tesoro had ended at 2 a.m. Maria had managed to avoid Franco, her manager, who had simply left her cash-out envelope at the hostess stand, a silent, ominous gesture that suggested her employment was hanging by a thread. She had walked home, the Chicago wind cutting through her thin jacket, her mind replaying the moment with Niccolo Cavallo over and over. The crash, the curse, the spill, the terrifying, mesmerizing intensity of his eyes. She had slept for 3 hours before Leo woke up, demanding toast and cartoons. She had dropped him at her neighbor's, her heart aching with the familiar guilt of leaving him, and taken the bus to her second job. If Il Tesoro was a stage for the wealthy, the daily grind was a fluorescent-lit purgatory for the caffeinated. It was a small, narrow shop near the university, smelling of burnt espresso beans and day-old pastries. Maria worked the counter from noon until 5, a mind-numbing stretch of pulling shots and wiping down the sticky condiment bar. It was just after 3 p.m, the dead lull between the lunch rush and the evening study crowd, when the bell above the door chimed. Maria was wiping the steam wand, her back to the door, and called out a mechanical, "Be right with you." "Take your time, Maria." Her hand slipped, clattering the metal wand against the espresso machine. She froze. It was the same voice, deep, smooth, and utterly out of place. She turned slowly. Niccolo Cavallo stood in the doorway, blocking the weak afternoon light. He was flanked by the same 2 men from the restaurant, their dark suits making the cheerful yellow walls of the cafe look cheap and absurd. One of his men quietly locked the door, flipping the open sign to closed. The only other customer, a student hunched over a laptop, looked up in annoyance, then shrank under the flat gaze of the men and quickly began packing his bag. "Sir," Maria whispered, her hand gripping the damp cleaning cloth, "what are you doing here?" "I was thirsty," Niccolo said, his eyes scanning the shop, his expression one of faint distaste. He stepped forward, his expensive leather shoes silent on the linoleum. He was not dressed as a customer. He was dressed as a man who owned the building. The student scrambled past them, fumbling with the lock. Niccolo's man unlocked it, let him out, and locked it again. Now, they were alone. "You are a difficult woman to find. Maria Jensen," Niccolo said, stopping just short of the counter. He was so close she could smell that same scent from last night. Sandalwood and storm, multiple jobs, no social media. You live very quietly. A cold dread, sharper than her fear from last night, crept up her spine. "How did you find me?" "I own the company that leases this espresso machine. I own the bank that holds the loan on this building. Finding you was not difficult." He rested his hands on the counter, leaning in slightly. What was difficult was understanding this. He slid a thin file folder onto the counter. Maria stared at it, her heart hammering. "Northwestern Medical School," he said, tapping the folder. 2 semesters. Class rank top 5%, glowing recommendations, and then you vanished. You traded anatomy labs and a surgeon's salary for this spilled wine and burnt coffee. I do not understand. Maria felt her face flush with a sudden, hot anger that briefly eclipsed her fear. You have no right. You cannot just come in here and look through my life. I can, he stated simply, as if explaining the law of gravity. And I did. I do not like puzzles, Maria, and you are a puzzle. Why did you leave? She looked away, her eyes fixing on the row of syrup bottles. The shame from last night returned, mixed with the old, bitter grief. Why? He pressed, his voice losing its softness, taking on a harder edge. You were brilliant. You were going to save lives, and you threw it away to wipe tables. I did not throw it away, she snapped, her voice cracking. She looked back at him, the tears she had refused to shed at the restaurant suddenly stinging her eyes. My husband died. Do you understand that he died? He left me with a 4-year-old son and medical bills that could fill this entire shop. I left school because my son needed to eat. I left because my dreams do not pay for rent, and they do not pay for diapers, and they do not keep my son safe. She was breathing hard, her hands clenched. She had exposed her entire broken life to him, to this man who represented everything she was not. Niccolo watched her, his expression unreadable. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by that same intense, analytical focus from the night before. He held her gaze for a long moment, as if weighing her words. He seemed to be looking past her exhaustion, past the cheap apron, to the person she had been, the person locked away inside. A son, he said, his voice quiet again. That explains it. The bell on the door jangled violently, making Maria jump. The man at the door unlocked it, but before he could, 3 new men pushed their way in. They were the opposite of Niccolo's crew. They were loud, dressed in tracksuits and heavy gold chains, and they carried the unmistakable arrogance of low-level thugs. The leader, a burly man with a shaved head and a badly healed scar on his neck, swaggered to the counter. "Shop's closed, sweetheart," he sneered at Maria, ignoring Niccolo completely. "But you can make an exception for us. We need a private word with the owner about his protection payments." Maria shrank back. These were the Finelli brothers, small-time extortionists who plagued the neighborhood. "Please," Maria stammered, "you need to leave. I am just working." The leader laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He leaned over the counter, leering at her. "What is the matter? Pretty thing, your boyfriend's not going to protect you." He gestured dismissively at Niccolo and his men. "Big suits. Huh, you look lost. This is not your part of town." Niccolo, who had turned slightly, looked the man up and down. His expression was one of profound boredom. "This is not your shop," Niccolo said, his voice calm, "and your business is not with her. Leave." The thug bristled, his face turning red. "Who the hell are you to tell me to leave? This is our territory." He made a fatal mistake. He reached across the counter and grabbed Maria's wrist. "Maybe I will take her as a down payment." The entire cafe erupted. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Maria did not even see Niccolo move. One moment, the thug was holding her. The next, he was screaming. A high, thin sound as Niccolo had him bent backward over the counter. His arm twisted at an angle it was never meant to bend. Niccolo's 2 men moved like shadows. Before the other 2 Finelli thugs could even raise their hands, they were subdued. One was slammed face first into the pastry case, the glass cracking. The other was on his knees, his hands clasped behind his head, a pistol pressed discreetly to his temple by the 3rd man Maria had not even noticed. The entire event took less than 5 seconds. It was silent, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. Niccolo leaned close to the leader, whose face was pale with sweat and agony. "My name," Niccolo whispered, his voice resonating with cold, absolute power, "is Niccolo Cavallo. This is my territory, because every territory you have ever heard of is my territory. And you." He applied more pressure, and the man whimpered. "Just touched what is mine." He released the man, shoving him to the floor. "Get out! And if you or your brothers ever come within 5 blocks of this shop, or this woman again, I will have your families shipped back to the gutters you crawled from, piece by piece." The men scrambled, tripping over each other in their panic to flee. They tumbled out the door and vanished. The cafe was silent again. Save for the sound of Maria's panicked, shallow breathing, the pastry case was cracked, the chairs were overturned. Niccolo Cavallo calmly straightened his suit jacket. He had not broken a sweat. He had not even raised his voice. He turned to Maria. She was pressed against the back wall, her hand over her mouth, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. She was staring at him, not with the reluctant fascination of the night before, but with pure, undiluted terror. She had just seen the panther outside the cage. "You are not safe, Maria," he said, his voice gentle, as if he were scolding a child. He took a step toward her. She flinched. He stopped, a flicker of something frustration, perhaps in his eyes. "You see the world you live in," he said, "the world you are raising your son in. You cannot protect him from men like that." He paused. "But I can." He stared at her, his promise of protection hanging in the air, a statement of fact as cold and hard as the cracked pastry case. Maria could not find her voice. Her world, which had been small, difficult, and entirely her own, had just been breached by an overwhelming force. The casual, brutal efficiency with which his men had dispatched the thugs, she could still hear the sickening sound of the man's arm bending, was a horrifying glimpse of the power he wielded. Niccolo looked at the damage, the shattered glass, the overturned chairs. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick clip of money, bound in polished silver. He peeled off several $100 bills, a stack far exceeding the cost of the damage, and dropped them onto the counter. "For the repairs," he said, "and for your silence, you will close the shop early today." His 2 men were already by the door, holding it open. His gaze swept over her one last time, his eyes lingering on her pale, shocked face. "Go home, Maria. Be with your son." He was halfway out the door when he paused, turning back as if he had just remembered a minor detail. "Ah, I nearly forgot." He stepped back inside, the bell chiming mockingly. "Tomorrow night, my family is hosting our annual foundation gala. It is being held at the Field Museum." Maria stared at him, her mind unable to bridge the gap between the violence she had just witnessed and this new, bizarre topic. A gala at a museum. I do not understand," she whispered. "It is a charity event, man," he said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips. "We raise money for orphans. The entire city attends. The mayor, the chief of police, all the legitimate families." The irony in his voice was so thick she could almost taste it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you will be attending," he said, the casualness of the statement making it all the more shocking. "As my guest." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her go to a black-tie gala with him. The idea was insane. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I cannot. I have to work. I have my son. I cannot possibly—" His smile vanished instantly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You are not working at Il Tesoro tomorrow night. I have already arranged for your shift to be covered. As for your son," he continued, cutting off her next protest, "he will be looked after. My own security detail, the best, will be stationed outside your apartment. No one will get within a block of him. He will be safer than he has ever been in his life." He had an answer for everything. He had systematically dismantled all her excuses, walling her in. "I do not belong in a place like that," she pleaded, her voice dropping. "I do not want this." "What you want is irrelevant," Mao, he said, not cruelly, but with the flat finality of a judge passing sentence. "What you need is protection. Those men, the Finellis, they are fools, but they have brothers, and they have cousins. They now know your face. They know where you work. What happens when I am not here? Maria." What happens when you are walking home alone or pushing your son in his stroller? The blood drained from her face. He had articulated her deepest, most primal fear. He had seen the thugs, yes, but he had also created this new, specific threat. He had claimed her in front of them. "You just touched what is mine," he had said. He had marked her, and now he was presenting himself as her only savior. Maria realized this was not an invitation. It was a summons. This was the next step in his plan, though she could not begin to fathom what that plan was. He was pulling her out of her small, dangerous world and forcing her into his vast, lethal one. It was not just curiosity on his part, it was a transaction. He had demonstrated his power, and now he was demanding something in return. Her presence, her compliance. She looked down, defeated. "I do not have anything to wear." It was a pathetic final protest. "A car will pick you up tomorrow at 7 o'clock, he said, ignoring her completely. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her cheap, coffee-stained uniform. "And do not worry about what to wear. That has already been taken care of." He turned and left. The bell chimed softly. The shop was silent, except for the hum of the cooler and the frantic pounding of her heart against her ribs. She did not remember locking up the shop or taking the bus home. Her mind was a fog of terror and confusion. She checked on Leo, who was sleeping soundly in his small bed, his hand curled around a worn teddy bear. The sight of him, so innocent and small, solidified the knot of dread in her stomach. Niccolo was right. She could not protect him. Not from men like the Finellis, and certainly not from a man like Niccolo Cavallo. She spent the next 24 hours in a state of suspended anxiety. She called in sick to the daily grind, claiming a migraine. She waited. At 5 o'clock the next evening, a package arrived. It was not a delivery from a store. It was a large, flat, unmarked black box brought to her door by one of Niccolo's men. He simply handed it to her, said nothing, and disappeared down the hall. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled in layers of midnight blue tissue paper, was a dress. It was not a dress Maria would have ever seen, let alone touched. It was a deep, sapphire blue velvet, so dark it was almost black. The cut was deceptively simple, with long sleeves and a modest neckline, but it was made with a precision that spoke of astronomical expense. It was designed to glide over the body, to hint rather than to shout. Beneath it were shoes, thin-strapped and impossibly high. In a smaller, velvet-lined box, a pair of diamond cluster earrings glittered, their fire cold and beautiful. This, more than the violence in the cafe, confirmed her powerlessness. He had removed every possible excuse. He had provided the babysitting, the time off, and now the costume. She was a doll being dressed for his show. Her curiosity was a painful, burning thing, mingling with her fear. Why her? Why go to all this trouble for a waitress who spilled wine on him? She felt that dark, inexplicable magnetism pulling at her again. She needed to understand him, even as every instinct screamed for her to run. But overriding all of it was a cold, pragmatic dread. She could not refuse. Angering the Finelli brothers was dangerous. Angering Niccolo Cavallo, she now understood, was suicidal. At exactly 7 o'clock, she stood in her cramped living room, transformed. The velvet felt heavy and strange against her skin. She felt like an imposter. She kissed Leo's forehead, his hair smelling of milk and sleep. "Mommy will be back soon. Tesoro mio." A knock came at the door, not the loud banging of a thug, but a quiet, sharp rap. She opened it. The same man who had delivered the box stood there. "Miss Jensen, the car is waiting." She took a deep, shuddering breath. She stepped out of her apartment, leaving her old life behind, and walked toward the gleaming black sedan waiting at the curb. The Field Museum was not a building. It was a monument to time, a fortress of marble and granite housing the bones of empires and predators. Tonight, it was a gilded cage. When Maria stepped out of the black sedan, the night air cool on her bare arms, she felt the eyes first, They were not the casual glances of passers-by. They were the cold, assessing stares of men in dark suits who lined the grand staircase. Men who looked at her not as a woman, but as a package being delivered. Niccolo was waiting for her at the top, just inside the massive vaulted entrance hall. He stood under the shadow of the giant dinosaur skeleton, a creature of the past greeting a creature of the present. He was immaculate in a black tuxedo, the stark white of his shirt a sharp contrast to the danger she knew he was capable of. He looked less like a guest and more like the exhibit's owner. He did not smile when he saw her. His eyes simply darkened. Moving over her in the sapphire velvet dress, it was a look of pure, unadulterated possession. He addressed her, and the result clearly pleased him. "Maria," he said, his voice a low rumble. He offered his arm. She placed her hand on his forearm, the fabric expensive and hard over the muscle beneath. It was not a gesture of courtesy. It was an act of capture. He immediately covered her hand with his thumb brushing her knuckles. He led her into the main hall. The room was a sea of black ties, glittering diamonds and false smiles. The air was thick with perfume and the silent, suffocating weight of power. Conversations were held in hushed, conspiratorial tones. Men laughed, but the sound never reached their eyes. Women appraised each other, their smiles like sharpened knives. This was not a charity gala. This was a gathering of sharks. Maria could feel the tension vibrating in the air, a low thrum of animosity just beneath the surface of the orchestral music. She recognized the mayor, smiling and shaking hands, blissfully unaware or perhaps willfully ignorant of the true power in the room. "Niccolo, figlio mio," a thick voice boomed. A heavy-set man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and a face like a friendly bulldog, approached them. He clapped Niccolo on the shoulder. "Uncle Luca," Niccolo said, his voice smooth, though Maria felt the muscles in his arm tighten. Luca's eyes found Maria, bright and curious. "And who is this beautiful creature you do not usually bring such elegance?" "Niccolo." "This is Maria Jensen. She is my guest," Niccolo said, his tone leaving no room for questions. "A pleasure." Luca smiled, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles. His eyes, however, were cold as ice. "Welcome to the family. My dear, we are so glad you could join us as we raise money for the children." The word family hung in the air, weighted with a meaning she could not grasp. She felt like a fraud, a waitress in a borrowed dress, standing in the center of a silent war. She watched as other men, heads of other families she presumed, nodded at Niccolo. The respect was clear, but it was edged with fear, and beneath that, a simmering resentment. She was watching a performance of civilized power, knowing that just yesterday, this same man had authorized a brutal, silent assault in a coffee shop. The speeches began after an hour. Luca Cavallo, the jovial uncle, took the podium. He was a natural performer, his voice filling the hall, speaking passionately about the Cavallo Foundation and its commitment to Chicago's orphans. Maria stood beside Niccolo near a towering exhibit of African elephants. Slightly apart from the main crowd, Niccolo's attention was not on the stage. His eyes were constantly moving, scanning the balconies, the entrances. His head tilted as if listening to a frequency only he could hear. "He believes himself to be the heart of this family," Niccolo murmured to her, his gaze fixed on Luca. "But the heart is just a muscle. It can be stopped." The quiet menace in his voice made her shiver. Luca was reaching the climax of his speech, his arms spread wide. "And so, I pledge to you, in the name of the Cavallo family." A sound, not a gunshot, not a bang. It was a soft, wet pop. It was almost lost in the acoustics of the great hall. Luca Cavallo stopped speaking. His hands, still raised, twitched. He looked down at his pristine white shirt, a sudden, confused expression on his face. A small, dark red spot blossomed on his chest, directly over his heart. He looked up, his eyes wide, finding Niccolo in the crowd. His mouth opened, but only a wet, gasping sound emerged. Then he collapsed, pitching forward over the podium, which crashed to the stage with a terrible, echoing finality. For one single, solitary second, the room was frozen in disbelief. Then the screaming began. It was a tidal wave of panic. The civilized facade evaporated, replaced by raw, animal terror. People shoved, tables overturned, glasses shattered, the crowd surged. A stampede of tuxedos and evening gowns, everyone running for the exits. Maria was frozen, her hand flying to her mouth. She had seen him. He was alive, and then he was not. The suddenness, the cold efficiency of it was sickening. She was knocked sideways by a running man, her ankle twisting in the unfamiliar heels. She cried out, stumbling, about to be swallowed by the rushing tide. Before she could hit the floor, an arm like a steel band wrapped around her waist. Niccolo. He had not looked at his fallen uncle. He had not looked for the assassin. The moment the chaos began, his only move had been toward her. He hauled her upright against him, his face a mask of cold fury. He did not pull her toward the exit. Instead, he shoved her backward, out of the main hall, into a dark, narrow corridor leading to a closed exhibit. He slammed her against the wall, his body shielding hers, pinning her between the cold marble and the heat of his own body. His men were shouting, their voices echoing from the hall. "Boss, boss, we have to move." But Niccolo did not move. He was staring at her, his eyes blazing in the dim light, his chest heaving. She was trembling so violently she could barely stand. "Niccolo," she gasped, her hands on his chest. "That man, they killed him." "He is dead," Niccolo said, his voice a rasp. He was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the room, the only thing in the world, the adrenaline of the violence, the sudden proximity, the scent of her fear. It all coalesced into something dark and volatile. She was terrified, not of the assassin, but of him, of the look in his eyes. "You are shaking," he whispered. "I'm scared," she cried, her voice breaking. "Good," he growled. And then his mouth was on hers. It was not a kiss. It was an explosion. It was the desperate, furious release of all the tension, the danger, the power he held in check. His hand tangled in her hair, yanking her head back, his other arm iron-banded around her waist, crushing her against him. The kiss was deep, possessive, and utterly brutal in its intensity. It was not gentle or romantic. It was a desperate, angry claim, a mark of ownership in the middle of death and chaos. It tasted of expensive whiskey and a pure, metallic adrenaline. Maria's mind went white. The screams from the hall faded. The terror of the murder dissolved. There was only this: the shock of his lips, the strength of his body, the terrifying realization that she was not just scared of him. She was kissing him back. Her hands, which had been pushing against his chest, fisted in his jacket. She was clinging to him, her body meeting his force, her terror and her inexplicable, magnetic pull toward him finally colliding. This was insane. It was wrong, and it was the only thing that felt real. The sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor. One of his men appeared, a gun drawn. "Niccolo. Now they are sealing the building." Niccolo broke the kiss, ripping his mouth from hers. They were both breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. He stared at her, his eyes black holes, his lips wet. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He grabbed her hand, his grip crushing hers. "Do not let go," he commanded, and pulling her behind him, he ran toward the danger. The ride back from the museum was a blur of flashing police lights and silence. Niccolo had not spoken. He had bundled her into a different car, this one armored, and had her driven straight home. The men who had been watching her apartment were still there, but their presence had changed from a subtle security detail to an occupying force. They were visible, stationed at the end of the hall and in a car across the street. Maria had stumbled into her apartment, locking and deadbolting the door, her hands shaking so violently she could barely turn the key. Leo was fast asleep, his face peaceful, unaware that his mother had just stepped out of a firefight and into a war. She stripped off the sapphire velvet dress, leaving it in a heap on the floor, a relic from another life. She stood under a scalding hot shower for 20 minutes, scrubbing her skin, but she could not wash off the feeling of his lips. That kiss, it was not the kiss of a man. It was the kiss of a storm. It was raw, brutal, and possessive. A desperate act of claiming something in the midst of chaos. It was the furthest thing from romance she had ever experienced, and yet it had ignited something deep inside her, a dark, terrifying pulse that matched his. She touched her mouth, her lips still swollen. The memory was indelible, burned into her as surely as the image of Luca Cavallo collapsing. 2 days passed in a fog of unreality. She did not leave the apartment. Il Tesoro had called, a nervous-sounding assistant manager informing her she was on paid leave until further notice. She knew it was Niccolo's doing. She was his. She was marked. The news was filled with speculation about the gangland-style execution of the philanthropist. The hypocrisy made her stomach turn. She was playing with blocks on the floor with Leo, trying to force a sense of normalcy. When her phone rang, it was an unknown number. Her heart seized. She answered, her voice a dry whisper. "Hello?" "Maria." It was him. The sound of his voice, calm and deep, sent a shiver through her entire body. "I am sending a car. Be ready in 30 minutes. It was not a request. Panic, sharp and cold, flooded her. "Niccolo, no, I cannot. My son, I have to—" "Leo will be fine," he interrupted, his voice flat, devoid of patience. "My men are at your door. They will not let anyone inside the building. You will be safer with me." "Safer?" she asked, her voice rising with a hysterical edge. "I just watched a man get killed at your party. I do not call that safe." There was a pause, a heavy silence that stretched over the line. "He was not killed at my party. Maria, he was the party. And now he is finished." His cold logic was terrifying. "You are not in danger from my enemies. You are in danger because I have claimed you. Now be ready. 30 minutes. The line clicked dead. She was trapped. The fear of refusing him, of what he might do, was somehow greater than the fear of going with him. She looked at Leo, her heart breaking. She kissed his head, her neighbor, now on Niccolo's permanent retainer, arriving with a quiet knock. The car was not a sedan. It was a black, heavily tinted Escalade that looked capable of driving through a brick wall. The ride was silent, taking her far north of the city, along the edge of the lake, until they reached a towering stone wall topped with iron spikes. Gates opened, and they drove through a small forest of pine trees before pulling up to a house that was more of a fortress. It was a sprawling Italianate villa of pale stone, its windows dark and watchful, overlooking the churning gray water of Lake Michigan. He was waiting for her, not on the steps, but in a vast 2-story library. Bookshelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to stand in. He was not in a suit. He wore dark trousers and a simple, charcoal gray sweater. The casual clothes only made him seem more dangerous, like a panther at rest. "You came," he said, turning from the fire. "You did not give me a choice," she said, her hands clenched at her sides. "I am giving you one now," he said, and his voice was different, quieter. "You can leave. My men will take you home. You can go back to your life. I will have the Finellis dealt with. You will never see me again." She stared at him. This was the out. This was the escape she had been praying for. She could go back to her tiny apartment, her 2 jobs, her crushing debt, her normal life. But she could not move. The memory of that kiss, of the power she had felt when he held her, was a chain. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me?" He walked toward her, stopping just out of arm's reach. The firelight caught the planes of his face, casting shadows under his eyes. He looked tired. "My father," he said, his voice low, "was shot on the steps of this house. I was 19. I held him while he died. He told me to trust no one, and I have not." Maria watched him, the admission hanging in the air. This was not the cold boss from the restaurant, or the brutal fighter from the cafe, or the furious man from the museum. This was someone else. My whole life, Maria is a performance. I am the Don. I am the boss. I am what they expect me to be: cold, decisive, empty. He looked into her eyes. But when you spilled that wine, you were not afraid of me. You were afraid of the cost of the shirt. You were afraid of your manager. You saw me, but you were still just a woman worried about her job. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking, becoming charged. And when I kissed you, he said, his voice dropping to a rasp, in that corridor, when the entire world was ending, you were terrified, but you did not cower. You did not weep. You kissed me back. She could not deny it. She had. I do not understand, she said, her voice shaking. You kill people. Your uncle. He was not my uncle, Niccolo stated, his eyes turning hard as ice. He was a liability. He was stealing from my family, from my father's legacy. He was a rat, and rats get exterminated. I did not pull the trigger, but I will not mourn him. The sheer, unapologetic coldness of it made her recoil. This was his reality. And you think I can just accept that? I think, he said, and now he was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You are the only person I have ever met who sees both sides of me, the man and the monster, and you are still standing here. He raised his hand, his movements slow, hesitant. It was the first time she had ever seen him hesitate. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed her cheek. It was not a claim, not a grab. It was a question. You have a depth to you, Maria, he murmured. That pain you carry, from your husband, from your life, you hide it, just like I do. She saw it then. The porca miseria he had recognized. He had seen his own pain in her. He was not just a mafia boss. He was a man defined by a single violent moment, just as she was. He was a lonely, 19-year-old boy trapped inside a king's body. She did not pull away. His thumb traced her jawline, a touch so gentle it made her want to weep. I do not know how to be the man you want, he whispered, his honesty raw. I only know how to be the man I must be. I am not asking you to be anyone, she whispered back, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, over his heart. It was beating, a steady, powerful rhythm beneath her palm. His eyes searched hers, filled with a dark, consuming hunger, but also with something she had never expected to see, a vulnerability, a deep, profound loneliness that matched her own. He leaned in, and this time, the kiss was not a crash of thunder. It was the start of a slow rain. His lips met hers with a searching tenderness, a gentleness that belonged to neither of them before. The data chip from the Art Institute was a declaration of war. For 3 days, the glass apartment became Niccolo's command center. The air, usually sterile and quiet, turned electric, humming with the low, urgent voices of his most trusted men. Maria watched him, a general planning his campaign. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a low, lethal cadence, switching between English and the sharp, Sicilian dialect she only half understood. He moved with a restless, contained energy, a panther pacing his cage, waiting for the precise moment to strike. He slept when he did. For an hour or two at a time on the sofa, never fully relaxing, his hand always resting on the pistol he now kept on the coffee table. Maria would bring him coffee, her hand steady, and he would take it, his eyes finding hers. A silent acknowledgement that they were in this together. The line she had crossed was permanent. On the 4th night, the atmosphere changed. The frantic energy solidified into a cold, heavy calm. The final pieces were in place. Niccolo stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights. He was dressed in a simple black suit, his tie a stark, dark gray. "It is time," he said, not turning. "The Rinaldi shipping firm has its main warehouse at the docks. Marco Rinaldi will be there tonight, meeting with the last of his captains. Russo's data has frozen his accounts. He's hemorrhaging money. He's desperate. What will you do? Maria asked, her voice quiet. I will offer him a choice, Niccolo said, his voice void of all emotion. He gives me his territory, his men, and he disappears. He lives out his days in some sun-bleached country with no name, or he refuses and he ends. And you believe he will just walk away? Niccolo finally turned to her. His face was carved from granite. No, I believe he will try to kill me, and my men will kill him first. A cold dread, familiar and sharp, settled in her stomach. You are walking into an ambush. I am walking in as the king. Maria, he's the one who is cornered. He came to her, taking her face in his hands. His palms were warm, his gaze intense. The guards outside this apartment will not move. You and Leo are safer here than anywhere in the world. You will not open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand? She nodded, unable to speak. He kissed her. It was not the tender kiss of the library. It was the desperate, furious, possessive kiss from the museum corridor. It was hard and deep, a brand, a promise, and a goodbye, all in one. He kissed her until she was breathless, her hands fisted in his suit jacket. He broke away, his breathing ragged. Lock the door behind me. He left. She heard the click of the lock, and then the silence of the apartment descended, heavier and more terrifying than the noise of his war council. She paced for what felt like hours, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She checked on Leo, who was sleeping peacefully. She looked out the window at the indifferent city. She was safe. He had made her safe. But he was not. She was standing in the kitchen, her hands gripping the cold marble counter. When she heard it, a muffled, panicked voice from the hallway. One of Niccolo's guards, the one stationed directly outside her apartment door, was speaking urgently into his earpiece. The door was thick steel, but his voice was raised in alarm. What do you mean, not at the warehouse? The intel was solid. Where is he? The second location, Cristo. They were played. Rinaldi's main force is moving on the shipyard, not the warehouse. The boss is walking right into it. Maria's blood turned to ice. A setup. He was walking into a trap. He thought he was the hunter, but he was the prey. She did not think. She only acted. She ran to the door, fumbling with the heavy deadbolts. She ripped it open. The guard, a young man with panicked eyes, spun around, his hand flying to his weapon. Miss Jensen, get back inside. You are not clear. He is in trouble, as she said, her voice shaking but hard. You heard it. It is a trap. You have to take me to him. My orders are to protect you, he spat, grabbing her arm to shove her back inside. I'm not leaving this post. Then I am going alone, she shouted, pulling away from him. She ran for the elevator. Damn it, he cursed, speaking into his radio. She is in the hall. I am in pursuit. He caught her at the elevator bay, grabbing her around the waist. She fought him, kicking and twisting. Let me go. He needs me. He needs you safe, the guard roared, just as the elevator doors slid open. She stopped fighting and looked him in the eye. If you let him die, when you know he is walking into a trap, do you think I will ever be safe? Rinaldi will find me. He will find my son. The only way we are safe is if Niccolo wins. Take me to him. Now. The guard stared at her, his face a mask of conflict. He saw the cold, hard logic. He saw the fire in her eyes, a reflection of the boss himself. He made a decision. Stay behind me, he growled, shoving her into the elevator and jabbing the button for the garage. And if you get killed, it is on my head. The ride to the docks was a silent, high-speed blur. The shipyard was a desolate maze of towering cranes and mountains of shipping containers, skeletal against the night sky, smelling of salt and diesel. The guard skidded the car to a halt 100 yards from the main loading bay. The air was filled with noise. Not a meeting, a war. The sharp, echoing cracks of gunfire ripped through the night. Muzzle flashes lit the spaces between the containers like strobes of lightning. Stay in the car, the guard yelled. drawing his weapon and running toward the fight. Maria did not listen. She scrambled out, her heart in her throat. She could see them, men moving in the shadows, flashes of light, the terrifying thwack of bullets hitting metal. She saw Niccolo. He was not in danger. He was the danger. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, using a massive forklift as cover, firing in short, controlled bursts. He was not a man. He was a force of nature, a general in his element, directing his men, his voice cutting through the chaos. And then she saw the other man. He was on a gantry crane, high above the fight, Marco Rinaldi, older, heavier than Niccolo, but with the eyes of a jackal. He was not aiming at the men below. He was aiming a high-powered rifle with a scope, and the small, red dot of the laser sight was sweeping the battlefield, looking for one target. It settled on Niccolo's chest. Maria did not scream. Her voice was stolen by terror. She ran. She burst from the cover of the car, running directly into the open, directly into Rinaldi's line of sight. Niccolo? Her voice, raw and terrified, cut through the gunfire. Niccolo spun, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, undiluted rage at seeing her. Maria, get down. Rinaldi, on the crane, laughed. The laser sight left Niccolo and swept onto her. The perfect target, the perfect leverage. No, Niccolo roared. In that second, Maria understood love. It was not the gentle warmth of the library. It was this agonizing, terrifying, blinding certainty. She saw Niccolo do the one thing his men were trained never to do. He left his cover. He exposed himself completely, standing in the open, raising his pistol. Not at Rinaldi's men, but at Rinaldi himself, firing 3 times, fast, desperately, to draw the fire back to him. He was willing to die for her. It was in that moment, as he stood exposed, a king offering his own life, that her heart did not just break, it solidified, it chose. I love you, she whispered to the chaos. Rinaldi's rifle cracked, but Niccolo's shot had been faster. The rifleman cried out, his shot going wide, and he stumbled back, his arm useless. Niccolo's men used the opening. The fight was over in seconds. Rinaldi's men threw down their weapons as the Cavallo forces overwhelmed them. Silence fell, absolute and heavy. Niccolo did not look at his defeated enemy. He ran to her, his face pale, his eyes blazing with a terror that eclipsed his anger. He grabbed her, his hands shaking, checking her for wounds, his grip so tight it hurt. Are you hit? Are you hit? No, she gasped, tears streaming down her face. What were you thinking? He roared, shaking her. You could have. He could not finish the sentence. He was trembling. The adrenaline of the fight replaced by the horrifying vision of what almost happened. She did not flinch from his anger. She saw the raw fear beneath it. She put her trembling hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. I love you, she said, her voice clear and strong in the sudden quiet. Niccolo froze, his rage, his fear, all of it evaporated, replaced by a stunned, stark vulnerability. I saw him, she continued, her thumbs brushing his cheeks. He was going to kill you. I could not just stay safe and let him kill you. He stared at her, the reality of her words sinking in. She said it again, sealing her fate, sealing her heart. I love you, Niccolo. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since he was 19 years old. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest, crushing her to him, his face buried in her hair. His entire body was shaking. He did not say anything, he just held her, a drowning man clinging to his only shore. As she held him, surrounded by the metallic scent of gunpowder and the silent, watchful eyes of his men, Maria knew she had made her choice. She had accepted it. She loved this man, this killer, this king. She had stepped out of the shadows and into his world. She was no longer a victim. She was, for better or for worse, his. He held her for a long moment in the cold, diesel-scented air of the shipyard, his arms a steel cage around her, his heart hammering against hers. The sounds of his men securing the scene, the clicking of restraints, the low, curt orders. The distant wail of approaching sirens were a dull roar beneath the ringing in her ears. He had not answered her. He had simply held her, his body trembling with the last vestiges of adrenaline and a raw, profound terror she had never seen in him. Finally, he pulled back, his hands framing her face, his thumbs wiping the tears and grime from her cheeks. His eyes were black, bottomless, searching hers with a desperate intensity. "You are a fool," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "A brave, beautiful, magnificent fool. You could have been killed." "You could have been killed," she whispered back, her voice just as unsteady. One of his men approached, his face grim. "Boss, Rinaldi is secure. He's wounded, but alive. Your orders." Niccolo did not take his eyes off Maria. "Keep him alive. I will deal with him personally." He turned his gaze on the young guard who had brought her, his expression turning to ice. You will be at my villa in 1 hour. We will discuss your definition of orders." The guard paled but nodded. "Yes, boss." Niccolo turned back to Maria, his expression softening, but only just. "Let's go home." The ride back to the glass tower was a vacuum of silence. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, heavy reality. She had not just confessed her love to a dangerous man. She had run into a gunfight for him. She had involved herself in a way that could never be undone. They entered the apartment. It was pristine, quiet. Her guard, the severe woman, was sitting in the living room and shot to her feet. She looked from Niccolo's grim face to Maria's disheveled state and wisely said nothing. Maria walked immediately to Leo's room. He was fast asleep, his face angelic in the dim glow of his dinosaur nightlight, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. He was the picture of peace, of innocence. He was everything this world was not. She stood there, her hand on the door frame, the contrast hitting her with the force of a physical blow. This was her son, her reason for everything. Her life before Niccolo had been a desperate scramble to keep him safe and fed, and now she had brought the war to his doorstep. She had run away from him, toward the very danger she should have been protecting him from. Her blood ran cold. The choice she had made in the heat of the moment, in the face of Niccolo's death, now seemed like a grotesque betrayal of her son. "Maria." She turned. Niccolo stood in the hallway, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. He had washed his face, but the exhaustion and the violence still clung to him like a second skin. He had watched her at the doorway. He had seen the conflict, the dawning horror and regret in her eyes. "He is why you cannot stay," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of defeat. He had won the war, only to come home and realize he had already lost. She started, her voice breaking. "Niccolo, what have I done?" "You showed me that you are the only person in the world I would die for," he said, his voice raw. "And that is why you have to leave." He walked past her, into the living room, and stood before the great window, his back to her. "Rinaldi is finished. His organization is broken. The threat is gone. You are safe. Truly safe now." He turned to face her. His expression shuddered. The king back in his fortress. "I am giving you the choice I should have given you from the beginning. Not a summons, not a threat, a real choice." He laid it out, his voice flat and devoid of the emotion that had shaken him at the docks. "I will give you a new life. Anywhere in the world you want to go. A house, a bank account with enough money that you and Leo will never want for anything. You can go back to medical school. You can build the life you were supposed to have, the one your husband wanted for you. A normal, clean, safe life. You will never have to look over your shoulder again. You will never hear another gunshot. And you will never see me again." It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Safety, security, the chance to reclaim her future. It was the perfect, clean escape. It was the right decision. It was the only decision a good mother could make. She looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully. Then she looked at Niccolo. She saw the man who had investigated her past, not to harm her, but because he could not understand her. The man who had faced down thugs in a coffee shop. The man who had kissed her with a desperate, lonely hunger. The man who had stood exposed in a shipyard, willing to take a bullet for her. She thought about the normal life, the cold, grinding poverty, the exhaustion, the fear of men like the Finellis, the loneliness. The safety she had been living in was an illusion. She had been a victim, waiting for the next bad thing to happen. "And what kind of life is that?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. Niccolo frowned. "What?" "The life you are offering me," she said, walking into the living room, stopping in front of him. "A safe, clean cage, paid for by you. A life where I have to pretend the last few weeks never happened. A life where I have to lie to my son, forever, about the man who saved us." She shook her head. "That is not safety, Niccolo. That is just a different kind of prison." "Maria, I am a killer," he said, his voice hard, as if trying to convince himself. "You saw it tonight. This is my world. It is blood and violence. It will not change. I will not change." "I know," she said, her voice softening. She reached up and touched his face, her hand steady. "I'm not asking you to change. I am not a fool. I do not think this is a fairy tale. I know exactly who you are." A flicker of confusion, of hope, passed through his eyes. "That woman," she continued, "the one you found in the restaurant, the one who spilled wine on you, the one who was drowning in her past, she is gone. She died tonight." She took a deep breath, her decision settling in her bones. "Absolute and final. I am not weak. I am not just something you protect. I am the woman who ran into a gunfight because she could not bear the thought of you dying. I am the woman who just became an accessory in your war. And I am the woman who loves you, all of you, the monster and the man." She looked him dead in the eye, her gaze as strong and steady as his. "I'm not taking your offer. I'm not running. I am staying. I am staying with you, but not as your prisoner, not as your pet, as your partner." She saw his composure crack. She saw the 19-year-old boy who had lost his father. She saw the lonely king who had never trusted anyone. And she saw the man who was staring at her as if she were the only thing holding him together. "My choice," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is you. Leo is my life, but you are my heart, and I am not giving either of you up." He stared at her for a long, silent moment. She had taken away his last defense. She had refused to be saved. She had instead chosen to stand with him, to save him. Slowly, as if afraid she might vanish, he reached for her. He did not pull her into a desperate, crushing embrace. He simply wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck, and held her. She felt a single, shuddering breath rack his entire body. It was the sound of a man who had been at war his entire life and had, for the first time, finally found a reason to come home. The silence in the 30th floor apartment was absolute, broken only by the sound of their breathing. He held her, his grip no longer the desperate clutch of a man about to lose everything, but the sure, steady, and unyielding embrace of a man who had found his center. He had been a king on an island, and she had just built a bridge. He pulled back, his hands still framing her face. His eyes, dark and turbulent from the night's battle, were stripped bare. The coldness, the profound, 19-year-old loneliness she had always sensed beneath the armor, was gone. In its place was a raw, stunned vulnerability that mirrored her own. "You are sure?" he whispered. It was not a question. It was a plea for confirmation. "I am sure," she said, her voice unwavering. The last of her fear burned away by the certainty of her choice. He kissed her then. It was the third time, and this kiss was the one that defined everything. It was not the brutal, claiming kiss of the museum, nor the tentative, searching kiss of the library. This was a kiss of contract. It was a vow. His lips met hers not with passion, but with a searing, profound honesty. It was the kiss of an equal, a partner, an accomplice. It was a silent, mutual surrender. There was no terror in it, only a stark, breathtaking certainty. Her hands, which had so often trembled in his presence, rose to hold his face, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. His arms encircled her waist, lifting her against him, molding her body to his as if she were the missing piece he had been searching for his entire life. He had found his queen. Life, after that night, did not become a fairy tale. It became real. The glass tower, a beautiful cage, was abandoned. He moved them to the villa on the lake. It was no longer a fortress where he hid, but a home where they lived. The heavy, dark furniture was replaced by pieces they chose together. The halls, once silent and sterile, now echoed with the sounds of Leo, now 5, running and laughing. He had a yard the size of a park, shielded by ancient stone walls and men who were no longer just shadows. They treated Maria with a new, profound, and visible respect. She was not Miss Jensen. She was Donna Maria. She did not return to medical school. Her old dream felt like it belonged to another person, a ghost from a past life. She found her sharp, analytical mind, the one that had excelled in anatomy, was just as adept at navigating the complex web of Niccolò's legitimate businesses. He did not shield her from his world. He invited her into it. She was not involved in the violence, in the darkness that still churned beneath the surface of the city. But she was involved in everything else. The shipping logistics, the real estate portfolios, the charity foundations that Luca had once used as a shield. He had made her his partner, not just his lover. He trusted her, in his world. That was a currency more valuable than money or power. It was everything. The challenges did not vanish. The underworld was a sea of predators, and a king was always a target. But Niccolò, with Maria at his side, was no longer just a man defending a throne. He was a man defending his family. He became, if anything, more ruthless, more decisive, precisely because he had so much more to lose. There were still nights when he came home late, the scent of the cold lake wind and something metallic clinging to his suit. He would come to their room, and she would be waiting, reading in the low light. She would not ask where he had been or what he had done. She knew. She had made her choice. She would simply set her book aside and open her arms. He would come to her, shedding his jacket and tie, and fold his large frame beside her, burying his face in her hair. He would hold her, saying nothing, simply breathing her in, and she would hold him in return. In those moments, the monster receded, the king abdicated, and there was only the man. Finding stillness in the arms of the one person who had seen all of him and refused to look away. Their love was not a soft, comfortable thing. It was a sharp, intense, and brilliant thing, forged in violence, built on truth, and sealed in loyalty. She remembered one evening, almost a year later, they were standing on the stone terrace, a cool spring breeze coming off the dark water. Leo was asleep inside. Niccolò was quiet, watching the horizon. "Rinaldi," he said suddenly, his voice low. "He died in a prison hospital this morning. An infection." Maria looked at him. She knew that an infection in his world was rarely natural. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Then it is finished," she said, her voice calm. He turned, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. He looked at the woman she had become, this strong, unwavering presence. "You are never afraid of me," he whispered. It was a marvel to him. "No," Maria said, turning to face him, her free hand coming up to touch his chest. "I am not. You are the man I love. You are the protector of my son. I will never be afraid of you." He pulled her to him, his grip tight, possessive, and yet gentle. "Porca miseria," he murmured against her hair, the old, dark curse. She smiled against his chest. "Bloody misery," she agreed. It is it not? And it is beautiful. The journey from the stained floor of Il Tesoro to the marble terrace of the Cavallo Villa was not a rescue. Maria Jensen had not been saved. She had been armed. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a capacity for a love that defied every rule of the safe, normal world she had left behind. Her life with Niccolo would never be simple. It would never be peaceful. It would always be a balancing act on the edge of a knife. But she understood the truth now, a truth she had learned in the chaos of a shipyard. True love was not about finding a safe harbor to hide from the storms. It was about finding the one person willing to stand with you in the center of the hurricane, holding your hand and refusing to let go. And as Niccolo's arm tightened around her, pulling her close against the cold Chicago wind, Maria knew she was finally, completely, and dangerously home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please leave a comment below to connect and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.